file.
Yeah. I mean, that's how I eat my cereal. I don't know about y'all. Maybe it's just one of those littler boxes. This is like the granola, the box of granola that's like that tall.
That's how most of the men in my family eat cereal. They get like the biggest Tupperware bowl they can find.
If you're eating cereal, you have to, it has to say Tupperware across the top. Yeah, my proportions are probably off. So we're going to go through this once. Here's what I would say: don't expect this to work. Like, there's a chance that you have to repeat this whole process 3-4 times before you get what you're wanting, right? That's not a shortcoming on your part. That's just how this works sometimes. Sometimes you go through the process, you're like, wait, that didn't work. Let me back up and try that again and try a different option, right? But here's what I'm wanting. I'm wanting to fill my box of cereal up. Sorry, let's go ahead and set this to... I'm wanting to fill my box of cereal up with cereal, right? So we've already saw how to make an instancer of a piece of cereal. So I'll go ahead and create a piece of cereal. I'm going to use an emitter to fill my box of cereal up with cereal. And then after it's all sort of settled to the bottom, I'm going to animate my cereal box, picking up, pouring the cereal out, and setting back down. Now, currently I already have some animation on my cereal box. Just to give you an idea of what that animation might look like. It's playing way too fast. I'm going to set my playback speed. Instead of real time, I'm going to set it to play every frame max real time. So you get the idea of kind of what we're getting there. It's going to pour the cereal out and then set back down. Okay? So yours is probably going to do something similar. To give myself sort of the ability to kind of play with this, I'm going to go ahead and delete this animation. I'll reanimate my cereal box picking up and pouring out. Everybody's is going to be different, right? Again, what I'm targeting today is I'm targeting trying to pour my cereal out and get all of it in the bowl. I'll tell you right now that that's probably not going to happen in class today. I'll probably have to tweak around with this quite a bit. I was able to get it to do it at one point last semester. I forgot to save that version of the file. So it's a lot of work to get this to simulate exactly the way we want it to simulate, right? So the first thing we need to do, though, is I'm going to delete this animation off of this box. I just wanted to show you this so you can see sort of what the motion is going to look like, right? So go back down here to frame 0, hold shift, highlight all of that, right click, delete. So now I have no animation on my box at all, right? So let's get some cereal in there. Now I don't really have a piece of cereal yet. I'm going to show you how to do this with a little round, like, sort of Cocoa Pebbles or Cocoa Krispies piece of round cereal, right? This is easy because I can make a sphere, put a nice texture on it. It's going to be relatively convincing, right? So let's just go ahead and put a texture on here just so I can see it. Right click, assign new material. I'll go ahead and put an Arnold standard surface. I'll take my specular way down, my roughness. Maybe I'll keep it up a little bit to get a highlight on there. Bring my roughness up a little bit. Pull that index of refraction down and change my color to some variation of chocolate, right? So just so we can kind of see it a little bit better. Okay. All right. So this is the single piece of cereal that I'm going to be using. Right. So the first thing I'm going to do is, or the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create an emitter. Right. There's a handful of ways we can do this. I'm just going to create a standard emitter, put that above the box, so I can sort of watch it fill up the box, right? There's another method we could try where we could create a cereal-shaped box, have it fill that object, right? and then it would already sort of be inside of the box. It's kind of two different methods to doing the same thing. I think doing it this way will let you see what's happening when we adjust these controls, so that's why I'm doing it this way. Feel free to try it with the other option. But all of this is going to be under our Effects tab, right? So, just go over here, NParticles. There's that fill object I was talking about. We could try that. For right now, I'm just going to do this create emitter. Right? So when I create the emitter, a couple of things you'll see pop up.
Create?
Yeah, create emitter. So I'll go and try that one more time so you can see it. NParticles, create emitter, right? So when we do that, you're going to see we get a whole bunch of new things in here, right? We get an emitter, we get an NParticle shape, we get a nucleus node. The nucleus node, just as a reminder from last class period, the nucleus node is the thing that makes physics exist in the scene, right? Physics is now a thing, and anything that's an NParticle or an N object will now be affected by that physics, right? The emitter is an object that we can put it wherever we want to. It will spit out particles, right? It emits particles. Right? The NParticle 1 is the particles after they've been emitted, right? So those are the three things that we have to sort of play with in this scene as of now. Currently, they're colliding with nothing. We have no passive colliders, but we'll look at that here in a second. So if I take my emitter, I'm just going to sort of put this above my box, right? Go back to frame 0. Again, you want this to be on. You want this to be your playback speed. Play every frame max real time. And if I hit play now, it's just going to start raining particles into this box, except for they're going through the floor, right? We need to start deciding in a minute here things for this object or these particles to collide with. You'll see they're going through the box, they're going through the side of the box. So obviously we're going to need this box to be a collision object, right? Probably also going to need this table, this ground plane here. I know I have one here. This plane will probably also be a collider, and so will our bowl, right? So all these things will be objects I'll want this to collide with, right? If something else comes in contact with it, if the cereal pours everywhere and it bounces off your coffee cup, you'll want your coffee cup to be a collider. We make anything a collider that we want it to collide with, right? So, so for right now, let's try just starting with the ground plane. I go to NParticles. I'm sorry. The collision objects are under NCloth. So NCloth, create passive collider. And when I click on that, when it starts over again, you'll see that they start colliding with the ground. Yay! They're not colliding with the box, like they're still kind of going outside of the box, right? But they're at least colliding with the ground. That means if any of them fall out of the box later, they're going to bounce around on the ground, right? Next thing I'll make them collide with is the box, right? So NCloth, create passive collider. So now, I'm not sure if it may have to reset before we get to see that.
Do we need to make the bowl passive collider as well? Since we're going to get it.
Yeah, in just a second. So you can kind of see that they're colliding with the box now. See how they're kind of puddling up in that corner instead of going through it? You can see them kind of bouncing off the corner. In fact, if I moved the emitter a little bit, let's do that. If I move this emitter a little bit this way, you'll see that they sort of hitting the box and sort of falling into the cereal bowl, right? And then the next thing I'm going to do is, yeah, like you said, we're gonna make the bowl a collider too, right? So NCloth, create passive collider. Now we know that those particles are going to interact with those three objects no matter what I do in my scene, right? Now, we'll get around here in a second to trying to pour those out. But right now, these particles are not necessarily looking or acting like we want them to. Right? If at any point, and you're following along, if at any point you need me to stop and go back and explain stuff, stop me. Like raise your hand, wave me down, whatever. I can re-explain something. But at this point, all we've done is create an emitter, put it above the box, and we've made the table, the box, and the bowl passive colliders, right? And so now these particles that are being emitted are bouncing off of those objects, right? So now let's make them look like that piece of cereal, okay? So that piece of cereal I made is over here, right? Currently named P-Sphere 2. I'm just going to name that original cereal. Which is actually my DJ name. So original cereal, so that way we know which one was the original one, right? Actually, that means if we go back later and make changes to that, it will affect all of the instances we make, right? So this is sort of a process that people miss sometimes. There's a specific order and specific objects you have to select to make this next step work, right? So kind of follow along with me in the outliner here. I'm going to select my original cereal. Okay. Then I'm going to select NParticle 1, not the emitter, but the particle. I'm doing that by holding Control in the outliner. And then under NParticles, I'm going to go to Instancer. Okay. So original cereal, then NParticle 1, and then Instancer. Yes? Is it? Interesting. That's weird. Is it frozen for everybody else? Anybody else?
Also, the particles are shooting out two things.
Like there's no emitter or outliner.
Oh, that's not what I was thinking. It's still shooting.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's no.
But like whenever you moved your mouse across the screen, that's why.
So it's like the UI is not showing up? Yeah. That's weird. The outliner isn't. Oh, goodness. This is weird. Let's try this. Stop sharing. Let me reshare and see if that fixes anything. For now, all right. If it does it again, let me know, and I can kick it off and reestablish it. So, yes.
After instancing, is it supposed to still shoot out the white ones?
It shouldn't. So we got original cereal, NParticle 1, NParticles, Instancer. If it does, try going all the way back to the beginning, like click the back button to go back to 0. So usually some of these settings won't take effect until it loops back around to the beginning of the animation, right? So if you go back to 0 and hit play, this is what you should be getting. Are you getting that?
Cereal's supposed to slide everywhere. I can't tell whether it's a bug or a feature.
No. Yeah, well, some of the settings are probably set to make it do that right now. Okay, the hands just went up. Let's see what I can do. Yes. So you're still getting the white particles as well, right?
I only have the one.
So I've had this happen before. There's a trick. You can actually, if you select your NParticle 1 shape, you can actually hide that. Just hit Control H on that. But it will be an issue. So usually what I do is that this is so easy to recreate. I just delete the emitter and the NParticle, and I just go back and remake those two particles. Does that make sense? I don't know why, but all that stuff really shouldn't miss anything else. You don't have to recreate those. So if anybody's getting this thing where you're seeing both the little white dots and the instancer, that just seems to happen periodically to certain people. I think it's sort of a bug in the instancer. And what we do to fix that is really just recreate the emitter and the particles. That will usually fix it. It almost always fixes it. You can also just hide the particles, not the instancer, but the particles, and sometimes that's sort of a workaround. But I have a feeling that that's a bug that may cause problems in the future. Yep. So, yours is kind of an interesting situation. For some reason, you have 3 nucleus nodes in there. So it's probably that it doesn't know which one to look for. What I'd probably do is just wipe out all of the nucleus nodes and probably all of the other NParticles stuff too, like the emitters and all the rigid stuff. And then just re-add that. See if it'll let it connect this time. I know you kind of go back to the beginning, but yes. So yours is just one polygon thick. The easiest way that I would say to do it is to just grab all of the faces and extrude them just a little bit.
You could just do thickness.
Can we do a thickness?
Yeah. If you do thickness to positive, it should just do. That's how I made my whole.
What did you find with thickness? Is it just when you extrude?
Yeah, when you extrude, it has an option
Yeah.
called thickness, but you have to have the whole object selected.
You had to loop back to 0 again. It's because I was over your shoulder.
I mean, I was just doing the bowls.
Was there another issue I
Make
should
it a
have?
little different with the video block. Should we make it something like
Yes. I would, but I'm going to show you something else that's going to make that a little bit. So some of this, when we make them self-collide with it, they're going to explode. And it's going to be great, but then we got to figure out how to fix it. Yes.
No, we gotta do
So you select the mesh, so you have that, and you select the NParticle 1 shape. You have to hold controls.
Okay, gotcha.
So you select them in that order.
Why
Select
is
the mesh first, and then NParticle 1, and then NParticles.
Right.
Mhm.
Well,
There you go.
Leonardo,
Yes.
my objects will not turn into passive gliders at all.
Oh.
I've tried and they keep going through everything.
So, part of the issue is for some reason you have a whole bunch of nucleus objects. So what it is, it's like it's being a passive glider for nucleus 4, whereas this is being a passive or being an instancer for nucleus 2. It's almost like there's 3 different laws of physics in yours, right? I know it's a pain in the butt, but what I would do is just delete all of this nucleus stuff over here, and then try one more time. I think this time it'll work.
See, I wouldn't be mad with the.
See, remember when I said we may have to do this more than one time? Like this is, it happens. Like I don't know why. There's weird little bugs in it, so the instancer has a little bit of a bug. Sometimes your particles just go haywire, and you're like, so okay. So this can get fun, but it also can get a little explosive, right? So I'm going to choose my NParticle 1, right? So the way I want you to think about this is inside of each of those little pieces of cereal that's falling, right, is a dot, that original dot we were seeing from the emitter, right? That's what's being simulated, is that tiny dot, right? And so if we look, we'll see that our cereal is like inside of itself, right? Like they're colliding through each other, right? Like they're clashing through each other. So also those little dots are, since they're what's being simulated, we're going to get some, we're gonna be changing, still not working? Or yes?
It's still shooting white particles regardless. So.
But you can see the other part?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would just hide the white particles for right now. Trust me, like it may not be the last time you simulate it. After we get all this stuff working, like the process to make it happen, like recreating the particles is a few clicks, but yeah, we'll get it. Okay, so something else that's happening with these particles is once they're landing on the ground, they're just kind of sticking there, right? So we can control stuff like how slippery they are, which, Sarah, I think that's one of the reasons yours are going everywhere is there's something going on with that. I don't know. We can play around with this stuff. We're going to make it start to simulate more realistically. A couple of things for that to happen is that little dot needs to start simulating not as if it's a little dot, but more as if it's a shape that's the size of this piece of cereal, right? And so the first thing I'm going to do is turn on, under NParticle 1, right? I will note this, like, I just leave mine playing in a loop, but sometimes when you click on stuff, things don't update because of that, right? I changed to emitter 1, but it's still showing me NParticle 1. I don't see that until I hit stop, and then it'll update, right? So I'm going to go to NParticle 1, and under collisions, on this NParticle shape 1, I'm in the attribute editor, right? Under collisions, I'm going to click self-collide. Now, when I hit play, it's going to act a little different. Oh, that was surprisingly not explosive. Did yours explode? All right, I'm glad it's reacting appropriately, right? You'll see now they're not seeming to go as much inside of each other, but they're still kind of bunching together. They're still not colliding correctly, right? Some of that's because we're still simulating those dots, right? And those dots have sort of an imaginary thickness, right? We're seeing them as dots, but Maya is thinking of them as like sort of slightly larger than a dot, right? So some of that is going to be right here under particle size, right? So if I crank up particle size, that's when they explode, right? So I probably cranked it up a little too much, right? So now what's happening is Maya's thinking of those little bitty tiny dots as giant spheres, right? I have to find sort of the appropriate size for them, right?
More.
Yeah.
Crank it up.
So we can play around with this a little bit. I'm thinking mine's probably about 0.3.
More like 3,000.
Yeah. There we go. Look at that. So, I don't know, mine's looking more like maybe 0.35. There we go. Now we can actually see this if we go down here under solver display, under collisions, and check this like self-collision thickness, I think it is. Does that do it? Maybe it's just collision thickness. No, neither one of them are really showing it. Or maybe I just need to change my scale. There we go. So if we do that, we can turn it on the collision thickness. This will allow us to turn this up until we can see the little yellow dot is sort of in the center of this, and so you'll see that at about 0.5, it starts to get bigger than my actual cereal. So really, mine might be like 0.42, maybe. Yeah, 0.42 seems to be about the size of my cereal, right? So if I simulate that, we'll start to see them simulating like pretty realistically, right? And then I can turn off that collision thickness so I don't have to see that anymore, right? Now, one of the things that causes this to explode sometimes is the fact that we're emitting in all directions. So I'll show you this to see if this is something you can play with. There really isn't like a one answer solves everything for everybody. You kind of have to play with these. Under emitter right now, it's an omni emitter. And so I can make this a directional emitter. And it's going to spit them out a little bit more in a single direction, right? I can change which direction that is. Right now it's spitting them out in the X direction, right? I can change that to 0 and spit them out into, now it's spitting them straight up, -1 or something like that. And so now, well, I don't necessarily know if that helped or not. So, just try 1. What happens if I just did 1?
Marlowe,
Yeah.
I can't hide the white dots without hiding the rest of the cereals.
Okay, hold on a second. Let me change this back to Omni. What's happening now? So if you choose particle,
But then when I play this, it stops working and just transfers.
Now it's really straight up.
Like the bottom of the cereal on a different spot too. It's like offset. So let's try this. still showing them at the center of it, but I think it's because they were zeroed out. Yeah. Let's try that for right now. We may have to come back and like rework with some stuff on this, but we can fix it. Don't sweat it. Okay. How many of you have something like this? All right. If not, do you need some help catching up? Like, what's happening?
Things.
All right, let's walk around and see what's. No, well, yours is coming down faster than mine, but mine's actually probably too slow.
Nothing exploded here yet.
Huh?
Nothing exploded here yet.
Nothing's exploded yet. All right. Yes.
My cereal's gone.
So if you scale down that original one, you can actually make it smaller. I like it.
I don't want to scale it down.
You don't want to scale it down?
No.
You want monster cereals. Okay. So I want to show you something. If you're just wanting yours to explode, right? Currently, my emitter is setting to emit 100 particles a second, right? If I crank that up to something like 1,000, right? That's where we get more of these like monster explosions, right? You'll also see that under my NParticles, like this has been playing for 100 frames, and I already have 4,400 pieces of cereal in my scene, right? So this is where you learn temperance. This is where you learn like self-control of this, like, because our instinct is like, I got to get that box filled up as fast as possible, right? The thing I want you to recognize is that all of these values we're changing here are animatable, right? Including that emission, right? So, currently we're 100 frames into this animation, and this is what we have, right? This is not something you were probably planning on being part of your scene, right? Cereal materializing out of nowhere above your box, filling up the box before you fill up your cereal bowl, right? You want to hide that from the audience. You actually want to hide this entire segment of simulation where we're filling up our bowl. Right? So we can do that in a couple of ways. Right now, we're on frame 100, and that's probably enough particles to have filled up our box, right? We could actually just render later frames, right? We don't have to start rendering from frame 0. Right? We could spend like the first 200 frames of our animation filling up our box, and then start rendering for our animation on frame 200, right? That's one option. What a lot of people like to do, though, just for cleanliness, they like to know that 0 is the beginning of their animation. They don't have to write down somewhere what frame is the beginning of their animation. You can do that by starting to simulate in the negative number of frames, right? So I can go back on my timeline to, let's say, negative 300, right? And if I hit play, nothing is going to happen until we get to frame 0, right? Frame 0 is where the animation is going to start, right? So I have 300 frames of nothing happening, and then suddenly this thing explodes and starts emitting particles, right? I can, the reason for this is because nucleus, that node that is causing physics to exist, it is something that you can turn on and off, right? And right now, nucleus is off until we get to frame 1, or frame 0. I can't remember which one it is. So we can go down here on our is it time attributes. Yeah. And we'll see that the start frame for this is 1, right? And this is on the nucleus object, nucleus 1, right? So if I hit negative 300 on that, that means now this is going to start simulating at frame negative 300 and fill up our box, right? That emitter amount is also something I can animate, right? So if I go back to my emitter, it's emitting 1,000 particles a second. I don't really want that. I'm going to set that back to, let's say, 100. Right? And I'm also going to go ahead and move my emitter sort of down into my box so more of my cereal makes it into it. Right? I want to try to get as much of that cereal inside of the box as possible. So I'm going to go ahead and hit play on that. Maybe even needs to go. The crazy thing is if I put it more in the box, the more of them will start to pop out. Like if I do it like this, they'll start to sort of popcorn out of the box. Right. So I have to find a happy medium where I'm getting more of that into the box. Maybe here. Let's try that. And then I just have to kind of wait for this thing to fill up, right? Or fill up is enough for what I have in mind, right? It seems like that's happening around frame 50 is probably pretty good for me. Right? So that means that this number of 100, I can animate that stopping. Right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to around frame, let's say 51, because this is backwards, -51. I'm going to right click on rate, and I'm going to hit set keyframes. Right? That means from -300 to -51, this thing is emitting 100 particles a second, right? From frame 51 to 50, I'm going to change that value down to 0, right-click on rate, and hit set keyframe. And so what you'll see happening is it will emit these particles until we get to frame 50, and then it'll just turn them off, right? You'll see it just stops emitting. And that gives me 50 frames for my cereal to sort of settle into my box. Right? It actually seems like it's taking a little longer than that to me. So what I could also do is maybe go back just a little further. Maybe set this back to -400. Right? I'll go back to nucleus, change that to -400. And I'll slide my emitter, I'll slide those back to about frame 150. Right? Maybe even a little longer, give it a little bit more time to simulate, right? So now if I hit play on this, hopefully by the time we get to frame 0, all of that cereal will be settled and in the box. Right, so it's all kind of settled down, and if I stop about frame 0, or it's frame 2, right? Then this is what our scene could start off looking like. Now that's our original cereal. I can sort of move that under the table, or I could hide it, either one. If I hide it, does the rest of it disappear? No, it doesn't seem to, right? So that means at frame 0, I can start animating, right? I can, like, if I'm just going to render frame 0 through 100, or frame 1 through 100, then all of that stuff where it was simulating filling up the box happened before I even started rendering. Yes?
How did you get it to stop?
I'll go back and check. That's all right. It was on the emitter. Right? So I just set keyframes on this rate. Right? So I'll do that again really quick for people to see. I'm going to zoom in here just a little bit more so I can see it better. Around frame 60, I guess. Let me go ahead and highlight those. I'll delete those. So what we're going to do is we're going to let it animate at 100, or let it simulate at 100 until we get to about frame 160. Right? So what I can do is right-click on rate and hit set key. And so that basically means that I nailed down frame 100 on frame 160. That means everything before it is at 100 as well. On frame 161, or 159 in this case, I'll turn that to 0, right-click and set key. And what you'll get is basically it will emit 100 particles a second until it gets to frame 160. And then on the very next frame, -160. And then on the very next frame, it will go to 0. Right? So now it's emitting 0 particles a second. That emitter still exists in the scene, and I can turn it back on later if I wanted to. But right now, it's just emitting 160 or 100 frames or 100 particles a second until then, and then I just turn it off. Right. So now when we get to frame 0. It's pretty much ready to go, right? I can start animating my cereal box on frame 0. Now here's the thing. If I scrub my timeline back and forth, like bad stuff happens when I'm in particles. So I'll kind of show you, like, if we were animating down through here, and we're like, oh, that's cool, and I just start scrubbing back and forth, I get like, you see how it just kind of, it still is trying to simulate, but it's like, I'm all over the timeline. That's not the accurate simulation anymore, right? One of the things we have to recognize is that there's going to be a long stretch of time here where everything seems broken, right? And what we're going to try to do is animate this box in a way that when we go all the way back to 0 or all the way back to -400 and hit simulate again, we can get a relatively reasonable simulation out of this. Before I go any further, I want to acknowledge the fact that my cereal is falling a little slow, right? Like, I spilled some cereal this morning and on the kitchen table. It did not fall in slow motion like this, right? So very early on, I may want to turn up my gravity, right? That's just because I've kind of modeled this to the wrong scale. If you model it to an accurate scale, it probably wouldn't be as big of a deal. I may turn my nucleus gravity up a little bit to something like, let's try something like 30 right now. And this should just cause it to fall a little faster. Right? That's feeling a little bit more like real cereal, right? Turning gravity up will also sort of cause it to bounce around a little less. All right. I have it up to this point. I'm going to save it because that's a lot of things that could go wrong. Let's see if we can just save it at this point. That way, if we don't have to recreate any of this stuff if it messes up. So File, Save Scene As, and I'm going to save this as Serial dash in class dash 0001. Point. There we go. Okay. Because the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start animating my cereal box. I'm going to animate picking it up and sort of turning it to try to pour some of that cereal into the cereal bowl. Okay? This is going to require some like back and forth of me taking a stab at what I think would be the appropriate way for that box to turn to get that cereal to pour out, and then simulating and seeing if I was right. Yes?
Are they supposed to be bouncing around? Like they're literally just bouncing?
No, let me look at yours and see.
It's sometimes. Like after it stops, it doesn't bounce. So just keep doing that.
It looks like self-collision is on, but maybe your size of those objects are really small. Go to your NParticles. Self-collision is on. Turn up your size there, the radius. Yeah, turn it up to, I'll probably try point first. And I try going back to the beginning. So they're going to blow up a little bit. So let's see what happens. 8.3 is just good. Try more like 0.1. There are some bouncy cereals. So they seem like they're a little bigger than that too. Let's try this though really quick. On your NParticles, we found your dynamic properties.
I didn't touch it.
I wonder if there's something about the box.
They're sitting. They're supposed to stay on the tablecloth.
Is that tablecloth still in this? Or did you?
No, it's not. I did that.
Okay. Is that a collision object? That shouldn't be a problem. Select your box.
This is like
would try deleting your rigid object and then deleting your history on that object before you make it a rigid collider
On this?
on the serial box. So delete those two. I don't know which one's the. Try deleting those two, and then delete history on that. You see all those inputs over there? That may be causing. And now try making that a collision.
Oh shoot.
That's interesting. Oh. Yeah, that might be something that
I'm not ready.
Yeah, try to do that. I say her to these bird signals. So a couple other hands up. That's how I like my Reese's cereal. Erupted.
That's your cattail.
Alright.
Oh, I'm on the bunk. I set these keyframes.
Here's actually the so you can go to particle size above that. And that's where you can change the size of the object that's colliding. You want to see the size of that in your solver display. So where it says off, turn that to a collision thickness. And so when you hit play, what you'll see is a red version of this ball. So you can see that you're not seeing, or I'm sorry, yellow. So if you start turning up your radius size, see, that's where you're starting to see the actual collision object. The number that is. So it looks like about 0.4. So now you can turn that off, but that should give you a closer to accuracy.
So that.
Yeah. And so you can turn off that collision thickness now, and now you re-simulate it.
What are you going to do with the actual serial piece?
So I think you're emitting too many pieces of
Oh,
sound.
yeah.
For me, the original serial piece, you can either hide it, Control H, or you just move it under the table. Whichever one works best for you. Sometimes hiding it makes me feel a little nervous.
I'll put it in a pocket.
Oh, how did you do like the negative?
Oh, if you type it in up here, or down here in this bottom range, type this into -400. And then on your nucleus node, we have to do that under time attributes. We set our start frame to -400 too. Yeah, that's nucleus 1 object. Okay. I know this is disastrous serial explosion day. There have actually been some people who just took that and ran with it. We'll put it that way. I am giving you a ungraded challenge, right? This is something for you to try. Try to see if you can get all of the cereal into the cereal bowl, right? If you can't, that's not something I'm going to count off against, because you may come up with an even more creative option, right? But having said that, I'm going to try now to animate my cereal box, lifting up, sort of turning, pouring some cereal for a little while, and setting back down. I'm going to try to do that without throwing cereal everywhere out of this cereal box. The fact that I've made it heavier actually helps a little bit. I've turned gravity up. That actually helps. Like, gravity's constantly pulling it down. But let's see what happens. I'm going to let this animation start around frame 0. I may go ahead and start it on frame 1. All right. So I'm going to select my cereal box. I'm going to hit S. And I'm going to leave it setting on the ground just for a few more seconds, maybe like 20 seconds or 20 frames, right? I may need to extend this out to 300, right? And then slowly over the period of about 80 frames, I'm going to try picking it up. So of course it's leaving the cereal behind because it's not simulating yet. I'm going to rotate it this way. And I'm going to rotate it this way just a little bit. Let's see what I can get here. So that's where I'm at right now. Let's hit simulate and see what we get. So it's going to fill up my cereal box. This is like that long time where I sit here and wait to see. You got to sort of buffer through all this and let it simulate, right? And then on about frame 120, we'll get to see what happens with it when I actually pick up my cereal box. Right? So, doing all right so far. Pouring cereal. Oh, look at that. So close. And now my cereal's getting too full. Okay. So, I'm actually, that's not bad. Like, I am surprised at how unbad that is. Right? So, a couple of things we can look at in here. Now we have to start thinking of some different properties on this cereal, because look how much the cereal slides around in our bowl, right? Is that appropriate? Is that the right amount of slidingness? For mine, it probably is. Actually, it didn't seem like I really spilled too many on this one, did I? So I think I'm going to kind of keep this. I think this was kind of a lucky break. And I'm going to sort of, over the next few seconds, I'm going to sort of animate the cereal box sort of going back to its original position. So around frame 180, right, select the cereal box. And I'm going to have it go back to its original position on frame 1 here over a few frames. There we go. So let's see what I get. Okay, it's all in there. So I always have problems when I'm picking my cereal box back up. Sometimes it throws cereal everywhere. Yeah, so I'm getting some cereal out on the floor then, right? But we're getting something. Like, this is close, right? I need to just adjust my animations a little bit more. Maybe I could just tip my cereal box up a little bit more. Everything I change, though, is going to result in a slightly different simulation, okay? So this is sort of where where we have to kind of mess with it a little bit more, right? So maybe over the period of these few frames, maybe what I do is I pick my cereal box up a little bit more, rotate it down this way a little bit more. Right, maybe I'm doing a little bit more of this, right? Just to dump out that last little bit of cereal. And let's see if that works. The other thing is I could probably just emit a little less cereal and see if it fills my cereal box up a little less. Picking it up right here. And it's simulating it pouring out. Right. 3 of them are on the ground. So this is where simulation becomes really challenging, right? What do I do about those 3? There's not I select those and say, oh, don't simulate those 3 differently, right? This is really just me dealing with physics. And just like it took a lot of practice on how to move to pour a box of cereal when you were a kid, right? Remember when mom would take it away from you and be like, no, you're going to get it all over the kitchen? Right? That's because your little arms were doing this. Right? I'm pouring cereal, right? That's what we're doing right now, except we're doing that in Maya, right? So it takes a little bit of control and adjustment of certain things to help this simulation do what we want it to do. So maybe the reason my cereal's coming out of my bowl is because it's too slippery, right? So that means I could go in here to my NParticle, right? And I could turn up the friction a little bit, right? So if I turn up my friction, I'm going to get a different simulation this time. Okay? Maybe it's because it's too bouncy. Maybe it's not bouncy enough. Maybe I need to change the bounciness, right? All of these are different attributes that I can change around in order to get a slightly different simulation. There we go. So a little bit more friction. Well, so the more friction means they didn't come out of the box as fast, right? But it also means that they didn't slosh around in the bowl quite as much. Right? So it's a give or take. And so a lot of this is going to be fighting with these really small, finite numbers to see what happens when you get a different result, right? How many of you are enjoying this? Okay. I'm just curious. It's okay to say, no, I hate this, right? But that's the truth about all of this, right? All of this has its sort of breaking point, its threshold of what's difficult. And the thing for me in effects animation, Laura kind of focused on effects a lot more than me. The thing for me on effects animation, and Laura, you can kind of chime in on this if you want. To me, that's the hard part, is that you don't have full control of every little piece. You kind of have to guide it. You kind of have to make it do, you have to change some attributes and hope that it simulates in the right way. And the more you do this, the more you can predict what that simulation is going to do. But I understand that the first stab at this gets very frustrating and we have to redo it over and over again. Try to have fun with it. Just try to enjoy this process as much as you can, but also just play around and see if you can get it to do something reasonable, right? Because that's usually going to be the challenge. Usually the director is going to say, I need all of that cereal to end up in the bowl, and that's why you make money at it, right? We can all hit that create emitter button now, right? It's getting it to go into the bowl that's going to be impressive, right? So here's sort of the last thing that we need to look at on this. The problem with this is still simulating every time it changes frames, right? Every time I update a key, or every time I update the timeline, Maya reevaluates this entire scene and tries to calculate a change in physics, right? Eventually, we're going to get this exactly where we want it, right? It's going to be like, oh, that was the one. That's perfect. How do I make it do that every time, right? That's the hard, that's the thing that we're getting toward. So this is a part that some people forget to do. And if you forget to do this, this means that when you render it, your particles are just going to go everywhere, right? You're not going to see what you're seeing in Maya when you hit play. It's going to try to simulate them, and they're going to scatter everywhere. They're going to jiggle. They're going to bounce around. I can show you some examples of what they do when you haven't done this step. It's called caching, not C-A-S-H. It's C-A-C-H-E, cache. Like that, the thing that your Internet Explorer, or your Internet Explorer, the thing that your Internet browser saves to make your pages load faster, right? A cache file is a file that has information in it that allows you to speed something up, right? So like your cache file in your browser just allows your web pages to load quicker, or it saves information that you would have had to put in otherwise, right? It's saving those things so when you go back to that web page, it loads quicker, right? Well, in this case, what it's going to do is it's going to save the location of every one of those particles for each frame, okay? So this is kind of like baking this simulation down into a keyframed version of it, right? When we cache this file, or when we cache this simulation, every time I go to frame 20, it's going to look the same, right? Because it's kind of saving it as a keyframe of what that simulation should be. If I get unhappy with that later, I can delete the cache and resimulate it and get a different version and then recache it, right? But caching it, think of that as like we're just solidifying that version of the simulation, right? So the way we do that, and this is another reason I always have you set your project, is we select the NParticle 1 shape, okay? And I go to N cache, create new cache, and this is an N object, okay? Now let's look at our properties here for this. What it's going to do is save a file for every frame of the animation in your project, okay? So if you didn't set your project when you started this, you need to set it now, because when you cache it, it's going to put all of those files somewhere, right? And it may be locally on the computer you're sitting at, or it may be at your home computer back at the house, right? And that means when you show up here to render it, it's not going to have that simulation anymore, and you may never get that back, right? So we set our project so it will save these cache files underneath our project folder, and we always have the ability to attach those, or to look at this animation as it is at this moment. Yes?
Where was that window at?
I'll show you one more time. So again, the thing we're caching is the particle simulation. So I'm going to select it, and then it's N cache. This is actually under the effects tab. So N cache, create new cache, N object. And so I go ahead and open this up. I usually just leave the default settings on here. It's going to evaluate our time slider, which means it's going to start at 400. It's going to go through 300. That's 700 files that it's going to create in our project, one for every frame of our animation, right? And so if this is how we want it, I'm going to go ahead and hit create. And what it's going to do is it's going to go to the beginning, and it's going to simulate this animation all the way through. For each of these frames, it's saving a file, right? Saving it as fast as it can. And then when we're all done, I'll be able to scrub my timeline and see that simulation. We do this after we've done all of our box animation, after we've done everything to get the serial pour to look exactly like we want it to. Because if I change that box animation after this, the serial's still going to animate the same way. It's still going to do exactly what it's doing right now. Every pellet of cereal is going to do the same thing, right? Pellet? Pellets? What you feed rabbits. Is pellet the right word for cereal? I don't know. Sure. Yeah, sure. Right? So 300 frames. And so now, if I scrub my timeline, you're going to see it's always pouring the same exact way, right? So this is a big deal. But again, if I go in here now and move my cereal box, that cereal is still going to animate the same way it was, right? Now I can simulate it, or now I can render this if I want to, right? And so when I go to render, I'm just going to render frames 1 through 300, right? I'm just going to render this part of my animation. So at this point now, I can also start doing stuff like setting up a camera. I actually currently have camera 1 here. And I can animate this camera to make this a little bit more of an appealing shot, right? I'm going to unlock that. Maybe I'll start here. All right, select that camera, hit S. By the time we get to about here, here, and then by the time part of this complete breakfast, there we go. And so now I can play blast this thing, and you'll get an idea of what our final animation is going to look like, right? Okay. I have a feeling that very few of you have this right now on your screen. You all have some variation of this, right? So this is a good time to talk about what the rest of your life is going to feel like. Every day in digital media is fighting with something, right? You will hear me kind of go on and on about this more in the future. We kind of built an educational system, just a society around the idea that the way work should work is that you go in every day and you repeat a process until you retire, right? Like you go in every day and let's say you're working on an assembly line for a car. They teach you to operate drill press number 7, right? And so they spend a whole day training you. This is the button you push. This is the way you push it in. Don't ever push it at an angle. Push it straight, right? And you learn all of these things about how to repeat a series of processes, right? So, sort of cold awakening moment. Those jobs are very rare anymore. Like they don't really exist, and the more of those that do exist are being replaced by machines, right?
Also, they're being handed off to China.
But yeah, like it's just
they've got the better location to make everything.
And it's just like they're being automated, right? Those jobs are disappearing. If you want a job, your job is more than likely going to be solving a problem, right? Somebody is going to give you money to solve a problem they don't know how to solve, right? Not because you have a secret formula for stuff. I remember when I was in my first effects class, we went through sort of this process of making a fire simulation, right? And I wrote down every number perfect. I was like, oh, that means that temperature is 3, and this is like this, and this is this, right? And I saved that, and I'm like, this is my recipe for success, right? Now I know the secret of fire. I felt like, was it King Louis in the Jungle Book, right? That's not how this works, right? Every fire simulation is different. Every keyframe animation is different. Every day you'll go into your job for the rest of your life, you're going to attempt to do something you've never done before, right? Because you're never going to reanimate the same exact animation twice, right? Unless your Maya file corrupted. So yeah, so maybe you will. But even if you do, even that second time through, you'll make it better. You'll have more information. You will solve the problem differently, right? What we're training you to do in a digital media class is to solve problems, not to repeat processes. So you know all of this stuff that I've just gone through. You had problems with every person in this room probably had a different problem following along with this, right? In fact, I've taught this lesson before, and I had different problems teaching it than I did today, right? Every time you do this is going to be different. Why you will be employable, why you will be somebody that gets hired to do this job is because you are able to use your creative problem-solving skills to solve that problem. I tell you all this because probably pretty much for the rest of this semester, is going to involve us sort of trying some stuff and trying to solve those problems, right? Your first problem is that every simulation in this room is going to be different, and you are all going to have to fight with all these tools to make it work, right? I'm here to give you advice on how I would solve those problems or some things that may help, but there's not like an answer for some of this stuff. Sometimes it's like, oh, I don't know, maybe try raising the box higher. Let's see if that works, right? That is sometimes just the process to solving these problems. I know that seems, that may seem scary, because what I'm saying to you is, like, some of this is up in the air. Some of this is really just like, I don't know, just keep fighting with it. Maybe you'll get it done. You know? At the same time, the thing you should recognize is that means your job is not replaceable, right? Because what you're learning to do is to be the person who solves problems, right? Like, there's not a problem-solving algorithm for this thing, right? You're unreplaceable once you get good at this, right?
Irreplaceable.
Irreplaceable. That works better. That's probably the real word. and you are all capable of getting good at this. Right? So what we're going to do is a lot of the rest of the semester is just fighting with things, like literally just like until it works, right? So this is sort of our first foray into that. I'm going to sort of stop at this point, and the rest of you can keep working. Friday is going to be more work time. I'll be in here, in and out of here, depending on how many people show up. On Monday, we're going to try simulating some other stuff. We're going to try simulating a little bit of steam coming out of the top of our coffee. We're going to do that in a different way. We're not going to use NParticles. We're going to use fluids, right, to get that steam, right? And that's going to be a whole other simulation battle you have to get it looking exactly the way you want it, right? Maybe some of you in your coffee cup, you have a like a witch's brew of like some potion that's green and bubbly or whatever, and you want purple smoke coming out of it, right? That's a different simulation. Everybody's going to have something different, and you're all going to be fighting with that until we get to the end of the project, and you'll get something out of it. And this is the biggest project in the class so far, right? This is a lot of stuff in there. I tell you all of this because it is probably going to be impossible for you to finish all of this stuff in class, right? I know that you may have lucked out in other times this semester. You're probably going to have to start spending some outside of class time working on this if you haven't already. I think a lot of you have. But just know that, like, you're probably going to need to come in on Fridays. You'll probably even need to come in at other times. That's why we have 24-hour lab access. You can come into this room or any of the rooms in this building 24 hours a day to work on this stuff, right? Also, I'm just kind of curious, has anybody taken advantage of the tutor? Yeah?
Oh,
Yeah.
you mean David?
Yeah, Dave, yeah.
Yeah.
How's that work?
Oh, you're talking about
Really good.
He's super good. Like, I can show you his animations. Like, he's really good at this stuff. There's a guy who just sets in here. Is it Tuesday, Thursday nights?
Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday.
Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday. I remember posting it on the band page a while back.
It used to be the wallpaper. I don't know what happened to that.
Yeah, he's in here a lot, and you'll notice him because does he still wear that weird vest? Yeah, he's the guy wearing the like construction vest, right? He's here to help. He's actually getting paid to help. Like, this is his job, and if this is something you like, we may need more tutors in the future, right? He's gone through all these classes. He knows what it is that has been covered, and he's super good at this stuff. So if you're here during those times, like, he's another person you can ask for help. Pretty much most of the upperclassmen can help you as well. So that's another reason to be here, later, like working. You're going to just gain stuff through osmosis. Somebody who's sitting next to you is going to be really awesome at this stuff, and you're going to learn something you didn't expect to learn that night. Yeah. Yes. Just more of my stuff. So, we're rolling closer to the end of the semester. We got, I think, 2 weeks left on this, and then I think 3 weeks for the final. All right, we're going to do this. It's going to be awesome. I'm really looking forward to seeing the results of these. So I'm going to shut up and let you work whatever you want to work on. I'll be here Friday. I'll bounce around today to help answer questions. So I think Spencer had a question. Yes. I would probably turn down your rate of emission just a little bit. Because one of the reasons is like there's too many particles; they're all bumping into each other and sort of pushing off to the side. So that might help. The other thing is try turning up gravity underneath those. So right now they kind of seem like they're falling a little bit in slow motion. Try setting that to like a third. Just put a little bit of heat on. And so they're going to fall a little bit more at a realistic rate, but it also means that they're all going to be pulled down into the box a little bit more. Does that make sense? So they're not going to bounce quite as easy. You can also turn down some of the bounciness on it. So kind of hitting the max load there. So, but yeah, just sort of playing around with that. You can also play around with like the height of the emitter, pushing it up or down just a little bit may help. I would try doing that up and this kind of together. I just like sort of overlap them a little bit, and it'll feel a little bit more organic. Because right now it feels a little bit more on that part. Figure like hey, how's it going?
Right. I just, is it alright if I delete the cache? Because I forgot to actually export it.
Oh yeah. So yeah, all you gotta do to delete it is just select the emitter again. I'm not thinking that's already
NParticles
and then go to ncache.
and delete cache.
Delete cache. Let me show everybody that real quick. Hey, if you cache out your particles and then change your mind, you can delete that cache, by the way. All you gotta do is NParticle1, ncache, delete cache, and that'll, I don't know if it wipes out those files or if it just breaks the connection to them, but that will get rid of that, and then you can make changes to your animation and then recache it to get the updated version of it.
You can delete the files like within the folder.
Yeah, I think you can. I think it may still be looking for them inside of Maya. Does it? If you delete them,
I deleted them from the folder.
and it still simulates fine.
Well, I was just saying that before, but we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah. Well, you may still do that delete cache thing and see if that just. It's what's driving the animation. Is it a simulation or is it a cache file? And by deleting cache, it may be breaking another connection that's necessary to be able to go back to simulation. Turn down the amount that's being emitted so it goes a whole more slowly, but you'll see that it doesn't turn into one big pool anymore.
And how will you remember? Is that how you tried animating it?
First picture.
Yeah. Now let's say it's on the
Should, the other thing, I mean, the box is I'll walk those things in. That's maybe part of it. You write it over here and make sure that every frame actual times. Then it may slow down the spots when you're playing back in here.
Yes.
But it's going to simulate that it's
I like the felt
Makes sense?
behind.
Yeah. I think it just needs to be fewer particles in it. So, bigger emitter. Now you're emitting. Start off with that. So you probably want to emit fewer per second, because if it's emitting 1,000 per second and they're all colliding with each other, they just have to go somewhere, right?
Can we tell me what the in-cache does?
So in-cache is kind of like, it's kind of like baking out that simulation, so it's permanent or semi-permanent. The reason we do it is so when we render those balls, like that simulation is always in the same spot, right? So if you don't do that, especially if you try to send it to the render farm, one computer may be rendering frame 20, and one computer may be rendering frame 10 of two different simulations. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, everything, I think jag all over the place. It's kind of like, oh, that simulation worked, we're going to bake it down so it always works. Does that make sense? So it's kind of like setting keyframes, except they're not inside of the file, they're more inside of a different.
Where in your project was it?
I think it's under data, if I'm not mistaken. No, I'm sorry, it's probably your cache. Yeah, so those are all the files. Now, if you're unhappy with the cache and you want to, if you're unhappy with the cache and you want to break it, you just select another cache.
Yeah.
Cool. This is all the and so it's like it's the one where like I want to get everybody in the system in the class. There's not a question. This one is the rigging day.
If you press D, I think you can change the orientation. Oh yeah.
This is probably like it. I think that's what he's How does it sell me?
Curious.
Oh, it does.
I'm not making it too
Enjoy this?
Yeah. No serious cash from
Oh, so you're gonna have to.
I have one cereal.
I don't know if that deletes all those files or if it just breaks the connection.
Oh yeah, I think it was the size of it because I was trying to.
And so now when you hit play, it's
That issue.
simulated every time,
Yeah.
and you can make changes to the animation to get a slightly different.
I know. I haven't fixed anything else. That's why they're doing that.
Oh geez.
I knew this box model. Serial fair that like takes advantage of that.
So that means, so right now it's still getting return of particles is how many do you want?
Wow, that was pretty good.
So,
Wow, that was pretty darn good. Wow.
You look pretty darn good.
Wow, thank you.
I'm so
right
sorry.
click on the trace.
Alright, let's see how this does.
So now what it does is
Ready?
If it's working, it's a lot of these. Nothing.
So what's happening is the inside of the box has a different number of edges than the outside.
Yes.
It also kind of rounds the whole box.
Works in like 5 minutes.
This is making me laugh.
I think what I would do
It's super funny.
is play around
I
with
don't mind those.
how short the
Yeah.
so
Particles as much as I thought.
Yeah, that's a lie. I
can you
did.
come around the
Ultra,
backside?
Ultra, it's not Ultra One got me. Yesterday, I
No, it didn't.
The review policy with those. That's between my series.
So I think what it is, it's going to extra edge bit on the inside and the outside, but not the inside. So you basically try to
Okay.
Yeah, that
Don't
edge
limit
bit.
my particles.
You see how there's those two?
See how
There's
this
a couple around the inside.
goes.
Yeah, try putting another one underneath that. See if that works.
Something interesting here. Alright, ready? Let's move it. Or that.
The other thing is your sides here can be a little,
But yeah.
so you can always put concern of the edge with there, closer to that edge to sharpen that.
That was something interesting.
Yeah.
and just mess with it.
Yeah, don't worry, it'll take me like 20 seconds for it to
Well, so the other thing is, you can, you don't have to use those. Like, you can use just like create some area lights and create your own lights. I just showed everybody that. Say that like you could have an option. But
See how many like give out so many copies and like every single time it comes out. It's just like no.
So,
You're only gonna live a single why do you literally every single person that's in the United States of America ever to run this? It feels like he's a good man.
He gets like Pokemon review copies and
Fun is fun, but
pretty sure that
for YouTubers.
he's in the higher ups like match.
Yay. I just enjoyed watching videos whenever I was in that Pokemon phase. You're always in the Pokemon
Dude,
Yeah.
why? What have you done?
I just lost myself in it. Like, I watched like a Egg-like or whatever. It's my favorite series I've ever seen. Egg-like? You know what that is? You get a bunch of eggs. So they make you an egg that has like a Pokemon in it and like random stats with it. And so each time you get a Pokemon,
It does just look for the fluidity of nice effect somewhere in there.
that's how I was this morning around a Raisin Bran. I'm like, oh man, because that's how I sound in the mornings. Oh man, I sound like a kid in a cereal commercial.
You sound like, what's his face?
Does that work for the?
Swiper from freaking, what's his Dora.
So my thing is like, you know how it just like sort of hovers there in space? Maybe have just a little bit of movement on it, so it just doesn't like freeze perfectly.
Right there.
Yeah, because like if you like right now you can't tell if it's playing or pause, right? So just a little bit of motion, like even if it's just a slow drift, right? Keeps it alive a little bit, keeps it like feeling like it's not just like pinned in space. So just changing that keyframe a little bit. We call it a moving hold. So it's like it's in pretty much the same pose. It's really just a touch. And I think doing that just a little bit will help. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
See, I think the nose long. I heard it's something like a nose long. Or egg long.
It's fun, but it's like, it's weird.
Did you just set this on class? So our
One, yeah, and I need less.
You have to get
that she said have to do it. And I go,
yeah.
she said say
If you want to
do this for the rest of your life, have to do it.
you explain
My face exploded.
he wrote he posted from there.
Guys, I did it. All of the cereal state. Oh! Let's see how it re-simulates. If I can get to where it simulates perfectly. Guys, yeah, it's amazing. Only one cereal to made it.
I would hope to get Zubats.
Zubats is Crobat is a god.
So are they from people or recruiting?
I love Crobat. On a spiritual level, I identify as Zubat. I'm constantly popping up and annoying everyone.
Oh well, they're probably going to get some pick if they I doubt they'll hire somebody else on this.
Well, I mean, if he's just there, I don't care. I mean,
Some places are different.
hole. Okay, let's see how this works.
Some people are just like,
I think that was
you're like, come on, dude. They sent me an archive.
Oh, what the fuck?
Like, if you can't engage me based on my resume.
It just shot me one. It shot
just says
exactly one.
And so,
What?
but a lot of people
What?
are like,
Are you kidding me?
I'm personally of the school of I don't like it as a industry standard. Because basically what you're saying is take a week out of your life and work with me for free.
It's always good to see it.
And I don't like that. I like
Oh, it's aggravating.
And I can understand art tests for entry level, but I think it should be small. I think it should be under your, like it shouldn't be more than a few days. But like some places,
It actually feels like more like
that's just what it's a debate that nobody's super passionate about, but I know like some people who just turn down a job if they really want.
Whatever that keeps falling off.
And so I think they made it full of people who are professionals. It's common practice. They're expecting people to come in.
I know.
Not only that, they want to hire people from.
What's it gonna do with the White Mountains everywhere? Some people out there say get the spoilers. I got
This is doing this.
Is it in-house recruiter or is this
She was in.
On the main first stage, people put spoilers.
Yes, it worked.
I was like, come on, dude.
Let's see what the rest of this looks like.
It was funny though.
I remember that. But I wanted to do just to prove that
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I would
Yeah. It's just like, come on. You have to know the people that do that.
It worked. It's perfect.
or somebody they work for and like they're
Save.
they're trying to make a commission off of it.
All the cereal.
And they're bringing
Dude, it looks freaking.
I actually got like legit. Watch. No, but I put exactly the right amount of cereal. I'm super happy that it's
But this sounds like, I mean, the 343 was in, something, it sounds like
I don't have barely any successes.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you only started it's part of the task.
So it's good, yeah. So I say I go into everything with a nice balance of skepticism.
Exactly.
And so,
She also gave me a
Oh yeah, but that was just for the
I can fix that afterwards, but I just need to.
Yeah, mine's the same right now. But I have mine like it ends there for
to try to hit one of those marks.
mine is double cheese.
How much I want to get paid.
I need to put my picture.
And she said that's what they
parents are kind of bold.
I don't know. I mean, I'm sure the seniors.
So just make sure they're kind of much higher range.
Dude, you should legit make Cheetos. Make Cheetos cereal.
It's like,
I love Cheetos. I didn't know
last four, they did a good range of stuff. Salary.com will be okay, except they don't really know how to classify us. The numbers are still pretty good.
I don't know. It's like
40 to 50 wouldn't be bad in like
every time I do
the Raleigh area. Baltimore will probably go from 50 to 60. 40 to 50 to 60. And then Seattle, it's on the higher edge. LA is on the higher edge. I think once you get up to the senior level, though, you're going to start pushing like 60. In the hundred low hundreds.
Very legit.
I was
The way that she was doing everything. But I just first with her. She started sending me emails like what I need to have and cold
Yeah, no, she's basically getting the hiring bonus or if you get hired. And so that's what they're she's going to pick people who are good. But she also isn't the one who probably gets to decide. So she's more than likely I'm hoping that they work with their team enough that she can actually give you honest, like, this is the type of stuff they like. Sometimes I can talk to HR and they just, so like, if she's a recruiter and works with them a lot, then she probably is.
They have such like stick to them.
What's your name?
These are parkour. Parkour.
Stick to the end.
I'm going to do a log off.
Another question on these. So I'm wanting the insides of the log just here. Cardboard just here. And I want this again. Sugar bombs. How would I get that to work?
So you can do two different things. You can apply material to the outside faces and then material to the inside faces and just use two different images. Or you could move this up here into this range. So shows like leave it up here where it all kind of fits in a little bit, right? And then export that out and make a texture inside of Photoshop where the top half is a cardboard box, the bottom half is shoe box.
Are you gonna ask Marlon?
Does that make sense? That's probably going to be the easiest way because then you can control materials. But you could do it either way. You're going to need to take whatever that front cover is into Photoshop to make sure that whatever that image you have is lined up with the right polygons. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Let me log off here real quick. So everybody's throwing on this way. You can. Oh, I've been recording all this time.